Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Heroes Never Die, your one-stop spot for all things Overwatch. I am your host, Terminally Drunk, and tonight on episode 219, we'll be taking a look at the recent news around Overwatch, its competitive scene, and so much more. Before we get into the news and introduce you to my co-host, let me just quickly take a moment to thank anyone who has been joining us for our live shows on Twitch, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So joining me tonight, as always, is my co-host Edinar and Ed. We had a pretty big esports week. We had the Countdown Cup. Now we're entering basically like the final stint going towards Overwatch League playoffs. That's coming up here within the next month. And, we got some interesting changes happening on live that we're going to be talking about. Maybe we'll get some announcements, hopefully, soon. But they did officially announce virtual BlizzCon. But more on that here in a bit. But looking back, man, how has the past week been treating you?
Well, all right. My Apex account got banned and unbanned. Somebody hacked my account. So that was fun. That was fun to deal with. Um, but it's been fine. It's nice up here in Wisconsin right now, so I'm spending a lot of time outside dealing with things. So,
Outside? What is that, like a new phenomenon?
mm-hmm, like sitting in a floating device, drinking White Claw and beer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing. So yeah, it was fun. I was able to catch some of it. So yeah, I had a pretty good weekend, minus the band account.
hmm Which, I'm still laughing at because just like, I can't imagine a situation where someone would be on the opposite side and be like, you know what? He's definitely hacking.
Right?
uh,
I'm known to be a big cheater.
yeah, exactly. It's been an interesting week for me. I've been playing Overwatch. I checked out the new Lucia Ball mode, and like I was really anxious to hop in. Play a little bit of Blurns Ball, and I have to say, Ed, as I mentioned earlier to you, I didn't really have a problem with the mode in itself. Introducing the multi-ball aspect. I will say, as like the goalie, it does make it pretty like nerve-wracking trying to like make sure you know where everything is in play at the time. The issue I had was more so with the designs of the arenas because I don't really remember this from last season, or maybe I just didn't play last season at all, but there were a lot more obstacles or just like things that were in the way that you could like wall ride off of, and sometimes they were just in very unfortunate locations where they take up so much of the screen where it really messes with your vision, especially if you are the goalie in that case. So I was like, okay, well, let me try doing like the normal Lucy Ball like outside of the remix, which was the newer iteration, and no change in that regard for the arenas themselves. So it's just like, well, if I didn't like it in this mode, I'm not gonna like it in the normal mode. So like that was a huge detractor from me actually stepping back in at this point. So that was a little unfortunate because I was looking to rack up quick wins to get the weekly challenges out of the way. I did manage to get the Union Jack Tracer one. The current week is the Sandcastle Bastion skin and unlock, so be sure you guys get your games in on that front. Outside of that, though, I actually did some competitive on stream the other night, which was an
I
experience.
heard. I heard.
So yeah, so I played all 5 of my support games. So here's a rundown of some of the stuff I saw. Okay, game one, we actually have an okay comp. Like I'm not gonna complain about the comp here, but we had like a Rein Zarya, Drunkrat Genji, Zenyatta Baptiste, and we were on Numbani, and we got held in the streets phase after we got that first point for a while. because, our team was not dealing with the Ash and the Junkrat, who were basically, in the stores or, like, on top of the bus. Really no way to, like, actually deal with them. On the other side, like, on our defense, we actually held pretty good towards the last points, but unfortunately we ended up losing to a Nano Blade when we hit overtime. So, not, like, a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination to start things. And then everything took, like, a dramatic turn going into the second game, where, this is where we start to see some of the off-tank shenanigans happening, which was a recurring theme here. We had a Sigma Zarya pairing with Genji 76, and then at this point I was like, you know what, F it, I'm just gonna lock in Moira, we're in gold, like, it's fine. And I was paired with the Mercy in this case. And they were running, like, a Wrecking Ball composition, and he would just, like, come in, no one would even look his way, he'd knock us all up in the air, really just deal with the back line, and it was just a constant issue throughout the entirety of the game. And my team on this particular map kept trickling in, so we were never really in a position to actually have a 6v6 team fight. And, they just, because of the trickling, they just breezed through the map. They had, like, 3.5 minutes in the time bank, and on our attack, we got close towards the end of Route 66. Weren't able to close things out, so, I'm 0-2 already. Then we actually have a double shield composition with double sniper, Mercy Baptiste on Rialto. That was a pretty good game. We both had successful attacks, but then we lost it because on the time bank attack, they actually were running a pirate ship composition, and we ended up losing to that. So, we're 0-3 at this point. And, the next game should not be one that we should have won. We were running Hog Sigma for the tank line on Eichenwald. So we had, like, no shield tank, really, to get through the choke point. So it took us, like, 4 minutes to even get to the first point. And, luckily, the enemy team decided to C9 in the time bank. So we ended up winning that one, which should not have happened. But, like, I just got very aggressive with my coalescence when we hit overtime, and it just kind of, like, pushed them off the point, and then no one touched at that point. So we won that one. And then enter Game 5. Again, we got double off-tank here. We had a Roadhog D.Va. We had Symmetra and Junkrat for our DPS. And we were on Hanamura, so I was like, okay, getting through this choke point is going to be a bit of an issue, but you know what? We have a Symmetra. Maybe we'll just TP to the point. That never happened. They just elected to go to, like, the high ground on, like, the left-hand side rather than just going straight ahead. And yeah, we lost point B in overtime, and they only needed, like, 1 tick to win it. But they just had, like, the ultimate economy advantage against us. But that group was, like, all over the place on our attack, where they kept, like, splitting off into pairs, and that really didn't do that well. But it's just, there were just too many moments within placements at the gold level where you don't have any sort of barrier tank. And, like, I understand people wanted to run Roadhog because of the pick potential. And also there are some changes in the works where Roadhog might be a little bit more prevalent now. But trying to work as a dysfunctional team without any sort of barrier when you're just taking all this excess damage does not lead to good attacks by any stretch of the imagination. So it was a rough experience for sure. So I ended up placing 2147 on this account, and it was around, like, 104 under where I had finished the last time I did support placements, which was back in Season 20. But man, like, it just felt like in so many situations, going into a match, it really felt like I had just lost the game at Hero Select. And I know, like, there's a whole discussion about how, at our level, per se, there really is no, like, set meta. But there are things that you can do, especially in regards to, like, the tanks that you are operating, to help alleviate the situation at hand where you're going to put yourselves in a better position to win. And when I see a composition like Hog D.Va, that doesn't necessarily give me a lot of hope for our chances going into that particular game.
hey, you know what? All you need is a hope and a prayer, and you can win. So you got to have faith.
I only won because of a C9 on the other team, and that's because I went aggro Moira.
Hmm,
So
sounds fun.
then ever since then, I've been playing Moira.
I mean, why not?
Yeah, it's funny though, because it's like in that last game with the Hog Diva, Symmetra Junkrat, I went Zenyatta on the defense, and like my team was not shutting the hell up about it because they thought that was a
You were throwing.
it was a throw pick, and like they were running a Widowmaker. I was out of line of sight. I peeked and I actually right-clicked the Widowmaker. But like we didn't have any way to get to the high ground, and they're like, "Well, how are we gonna deal with the Widow?" And I just kill her outright. And I was like, yeah, like that. But everyone just looks at that and just like, "Oh, like sure, that's a throw pick," but us not running any sort of barrier tank isn't. I don't know. People are confusing in this game.
People are strange folk. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, either way though, we at least got a couple of competitive games, like actual competitive games, but hopefully
So what'd you end up at?
as I said, it was 21-47.
Oh, okay.
So pretty low gold, but hopefully outside of placements the matches will end up being a little bit better, but I do plan on hopping back in at some point. Maybe I'll even do my damage placements here soon. But we'll talk more about what's going on within the game here in just a little bit. I want to talk about everything that's been going on around the league, because we've had a little bit of movement here. So to start things off, we have the Seoul Dynasty, who have promoted someone within their academy team, and that is their off-tank player To. So he's now on a two-way contract, and he had been on Gen.G, competing in Contenders Korea on this team, and it's been a rough go for that particular academy team, as they had some pretty rough placements here in the past 2 seasons. But it does give the Dynasty another tank option here, and it's been a weird season, Ed, for Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the Dynasty have just lost any sort of faith or confidence that they had within Michelle after the season he had last year. So there's been a lot of moments throughout the season where we have seen them opt in to run Gesture along with Marvel in the starting lineup, and it definitely has made things a little bit more predictable for the teams that are going up against the Dynasty in this case. So I appreciate the fact that Dynasty have been more inclined to like promote from within. But where do you think this is going to put To in this moment? Do you feel like they're still going to opt to be running the double main tank that they have been here? That way they could try to hone in on like the main tank preference in regards to like Orisa with the Gesture, Marvel with the Reinhardt in this case, and then it could just throw in To on whichever off tank they're wanting to run, or are we just going to continue to kind of see more of the same in this case?
I think we'll probably end up seeing more of the same. In my mind, if you have a team that it has a two-way player, it's different than just a normal signing. If you sign them to a two-way contract, they're there in case of emergency, not to be a starter. If you expect them to be a starter, you expect them to basically play every time.
Right.
And I don't see that being the case. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what they do. But I do think that they're going to probably stick with what they have now. That would be the smart thing in my mind.
Yeah, because when you think about it, at this point, they are kind of in the middle of APAC right now in regards to the stand-ins, and they don't really want to put themselves in a position where they can start to lose some ground, because they have been fairly middle in basically throughout the entirety of the season. And we have seen some of these other like mid-table teams in APAC be able to beat the Dynasty, especially in the tournament play, and that's definitely a reason to be concerned at this point moving forward. But it's not like they're going to be able to catch up to like Guangzhou or Shanghai or New York, especially given how well they've been doing throughout the season. And it showed in the Countdown Cup. A lot of interesting things kind of happening on that front. On North America, we actually saw pretty intriguing finals that, I know you caught some of it. I managed to catch basically all of the NA side, but unfortunately none of APAC. But looking back at the North America side, in the knockout stage, we saw the Reign sweeping the Titans 3-0. Valiant also swept the Outlaws 3-0. And then we have the Justice. They were looking to upset the Fuel. That one went to a 5-map series, but, unfortunately for my bracket, Dallas did end up taking it. And it is worth noting that Crimzo did actually play for the Fuel in this case, despite, a lot of talk about him traveling elsewhere to visit his mom. But, he still managed to play there. So very intriguing match there for the knockout stage. And then we also saw the Gladiators beat the Defiant in a 5-map series. So moving into the tournament play, we saw the Shock pick the Fuel. That was a pretty quick series. That one went 3-0. The Mayhem beat the Reign again with the score of 3-0. We had Eternal over the Valiant 3-1. And then the Fusion swept the Gladiators 3-0, which would lead us to the semifinals, where we had the Shock beat the Mayhem 3-1. And Fusion defeated the Eternal 3-1, setting up our Shock Fusion finals, which went in favor of San Francisco with the scoreline of 4-2. Now, a lot of people were basically looking at Eternal and Shock for the finals in a lot of the brackets, but Fusion kind of played spoiler in that regard. But man, Ed, it's just time and time again, we see Philadelphia make a run, and they're just not able to close out the deal. It's very frustrating. And I'm really curious to see where that's going to leave them mentally. But, there's been a lot of talk about, Carpe didn't play in the tournament. They were opting for Ivy and Hisu, so you didn't have your MVP candidate out there outside of Alarm. But man, did Alarm pop off in the finals. It was really cool to see him and Violet in that head-to-head match. But as much praise as we have had for Funny, Astro, and Alarm, it really felt like there was a clear, distinct differential between the Fusion backline and the backline of Twilight and Violet. And it's gotten so apparent that, it really echoes that sentiment of, when we first looked back at Twilight joining the Shock, and we're just like, well, that isn't fair. And that's really coming to the light here as of late, where the Shock just look untouchable right now, despite, a meta that a lot of people looked at as not being one that would be in their favor in this case.
Yeah, they just looked so dominant. It was a thing of beauty. I loved watching them play. I felt bad for the Fusion for a little bit. But the Shock just really showed how nasty they really are. There was a time when it was close. I will give them that. But then the Shock just pull ahead. And they just showed who they were. And it was just nasty. The NA, Countdown Cup was pretty, I'm just going to say this now, pretty effing lame.
It was by the numbers for the most part.
There were 2 upsets where the 9 seed beat the 8 seed and the 3 seed beat the 2 seed. But you can't call those upsets. So yeah, it was, but it is what it is. It more often than not, the odds are that this is going to be a more familiar, kind of outcome for a lot of these tournaments than what everyone wants is that one Cinderella team. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, everyone right now is basically just clamoring for that eventual match between the San Francisco Shock and the Shanghai Dragons, as the Dragons, again, coming out ahead in the Asia region for the Countdown Cup. This is a team that, they finished in first place, so they got the top seed, which earned them a bye automatically into the semifinals. So in the quarterfinals, we actually had two series that went to a map 5. We saw the Excelsior manage to beat the Charge 3-2. Spark and Dynasty also went the difference, and the Spark came out ahead in that series 3-2. And then you had the Hunters sweeping the Spitfire 3-0. So moving into the semifinals, it was the Dragons over the Excelsior 3-0. And then the Spark beat Chengdu 3-1, setting up Shanghai versus Hangzhou, which was, Dragons making fairly quick work, and that was the sweep 4-0 in the finals. And, I know a lot of people were like, man, Chengdu, they've been on a little bit of a run, and this is their time to shine. And Hangzhou's just like, nope. So I have to say, like, after the recent moves that we saw, at least on the coaching side for Hangzhou, for them to come in and just waltz their way into the finals here was really good to see for that team after they promoted Pagian to the head coach position after Mask had left the team. But, part of me is also in a position where, you look at how the bracket was, and I will say, compared to some of the other APAC tournaments that we have had these last two times, that side of the bracket was a lot easier to call than what it had been because of how the seeding played out due to the run that Chengdu had. So it kind of put them in a position where Chengdu honestly got a better seed than what they typically would be. So then that left Hangzhou with like some softer matches on the bottom side of that bracket, and it definitely made the most of that. But again, like, I don't imagine a situation where, regardless of who came out on top of the other semifinal, even if you added, Guangzhou to the mix, I don't think the Spark would have beaten Guangzhou, New York, or Shanghai in that case either, just because there is that clear-cut, top 3, and then you have the rest of the APAC region.
Yeah, it's basically Shanghai, Charge, Excelsior, than everyone else. It was just odd seeding. So yeah, it was pretty, like, I think we actually called it.
Yeah.
With what the finals would be in regards to all of this, Shanghai versus the Spark, and then obviously the Shanghai just stomping them, and that was 100% just because of the seeding. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what occurs now.
More of the same. Shanghai will keep on winning. That's what's going to happen. But anyways, in other Overwatch League news, we have the nominees for the 2020 MVP, which of course is sponsored by T-Mobile in this case, so fans have until August 28th to cast your vote. So to vote, all you have to do is go on Twitter, you use the hashtag OWLMVP, and you use either the Twitter handle or the Battle.net name of the candidate. And, just like we've seen in the past, the fan votes do account for 25% of the overall tally, with the other 75% coming from a combination of, the team general managers, head coaches, the broadcast talent, as well as media. So the winner will be announced during the postseason, and they will get the MVP trophy. They'll get $100,000, as well as the MVP jersey patch for the 2021 season. So looking back, we've had 2 MVPs so far. We had Sinatra in the inaugural season, followed by JJoNak, who took it this past season. And,
You should have got that right?
What?
I think you said...
I had it backwards.
Yeah, you had Sinatra.
Sinatra won last time, and then JJoNak was the prior one.
I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah, I had that backwards.
Something's fishy here.
Well, Carpe is in the top 10. That's not fishy.
No, that is not fishy.
So there is not. But, feels bad men getting benched in the playoffs. But, sometimes it just be like that. But anyways, looking at the 10 candidates that we have here, we have Yaki from the Florida Mayhem, Fleta of the Shanghai Dragons. Philly has 2 representatives in Alarm and Carpe, We have Kron from Guangzhou Charge, Void from the Shanghai Dragons, Choi Hyobin and Violet from the San Francisco Shock, Xe from Paris Eternal, and Eileen from the Guangzhou Charge. Now, Ed, I would say, like, looking at this, pretty noticeable. Most of these are Korean players.
What you talking about, Willis?
Not really seeing any EU or NA talents, and honestly, I can't say that I'm surprised in this case. But are there any like glaring omissions or people on here that are more of like an eyebrow raiser? Because I know Xe really popped off at the start. And a lot of people have been like all aboard like the Sparkle train in this case, but any particular names coming to mind for you here?
Well, I believe Shu should have made it. I wholeheartedly believe that. I think Ixie should not. I don't think Ixie is the MVP. He also took a while off.
He did.
So that was a little weird. Carpe's another one who I think is just in there on name alone. But I think that would be it. I'm a little upset Shu's not there, but you have Eileen and Krong. You don't want to have 3 people from the charge on there. I get that. Ixie is. I don't think Sparkle truly should have been nominated for MVP because he hasn't played the most. Now, is he the most dominant probably right now? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he hasn't played the whole season. So, yeah. I think that Ixie, Carpe, Shu are the 3 most glaring to me. But yeah.
I'm very conflicted on who to vote for this year.
I already voted.
I mean, I'd be voting between 2 people. And if I vote based off of the performance against one another in the NA Cup finals, then I'd be leaning towards Violet. But like for me, I really want Alarm and Violet to be the final 2. But you could always make a very strong case for Choi Hyobin. But if we're talking about like a redemption story, or just like improvement over like what we saw in years past, I think Void is a very strong contender as well in this case. But in a world where Alarm doesn't win the MVP, like you would have to say if he doesn't win this, he has to be a shoe-in for Rookie of the Year this season.
Oh god, there's no way he doesn't win Rookie of the Year. And if Ixie I think has some inflated numbers. I'll just say that
they did add a bot check to
Yes.
MVP voting.
So I think that it's kind of like when XQC won the Overwatch World Cup MVP or some crap like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the Alarm, in all intents and purposes, is the real MVP right now. But I did not vote for Alarm, although I think Alarm will get it. I voted for Yaki. I think he's the forgotten player in all this. Besides like Eileen and Krong.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have that name recognition out there yet.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely gonna be, interesting to see what happens. But yeah. I'm excited to see who wins. If Ixie wins, I'll be annoyed.
That would be understandable. I feel a lot of people would probably be in a similar position in that case. Elsewhere within the league, we got news of roster construction rules set for the 2021 season, and it's kind of came out of nowhere. We got some interesting things happening here. So for starters, from now until the end of this current season, if a team player ends up retiring, if they become unavailable due to COVID-19, or if they elect not to travel, the team can end up signing a free agent to replace a player. So any sort of replacement in this regard must expire at the end of the 2020 season. And then, for the free agents out there, they must meet one of the following criteria to compete in this season playoffs. So they must have citizenship for a country in Asia, and they must have an existing visa to travel to countries in Asia. And of course, that makes sense because finals are happening in Asia somewhere. We don't know still when the finals are. We just know that the start of the playoffs are in the start of September here. Now, there is a slew of key dates here that they have on here. September 14, you have teams being able to sign free agents that are currently not under contract to any Overwatch League team, and extending or otherwise signing their current roster players to standard contracts for the 2021 season. Starting September 21st, if a team is eliminated from the playoffs, they are permitted to discuss 2021 contract terms with players whose contracts expire after this season, or whose team options have not been exercised. And in the later case here, contracts for the 2021 season may not be signed until a player's current team declines to extend their existing contract. Now, again, there's a lot of stuff happening here, but I think the most interesting thing to talk about isn't necessarily with the key dates. It's more so the restructuring of two-way player contracts. So, what's interesting here is that they've basically made it easier for players to compete in both Overwatch League and Contenders starting in 2021. So, on the Overwatch League side, teams must continue to pay the two-way player salary and benefits while the players are competing in Contenders. And, the players and teams can agree to a tiered salary structure, but the players have to earn the league minimum salary at all times, which, as we've mentioned in the past, is $50,000 in this case. So teams that don't have an academy team, which is honestly quite a few, given how many are still active at this time, they can agree to player loan agreements with a Contenders team, and then any loan agreement must be submitted for league approval. Now, they also kind of change the eligibility here. So any two-way player that does not play in 5 consecutive Overwatch League matches over a minimum of 3 consecutive weeks is eligible to play in Contenders or any other non-league Overwatch League or Overwatch esports competition that is being licensed by Blizzard. And then you could have up to 4 two-way players competing on the same Contenders team in any given Contenders match. But here's where it gets interesting, Ed. Contenders teams can field two-way players belonging to different Overwatch League teams. So I honestly don't know what to expect from this. You could definitely make some really wonky, loans, or you can see some very interesting Contenders teams coming out here. But, you're not always going to be tied to your affiliate team in some cases. So I don't know what to expect from that. But kind of loosening the two-way player structure in here, might mean that, one, you're going to have more two-way players on contract for these Overwatch League teams, but also might mean that we're going to be seeing a little bit more flexibility when it comes to player movement from the Overwatch League to Contenders level, as well as vice versa.
Yeah, I think you could. I don't know how I feel about all of this yet, because I want to say this is just another way for teams to have more players but not pay them as much. You pay your starting 6, sure, fine, but then you have a bunch of two-way players on top of that, and then you pay them the league minimum. And I feel like it might suffer a tad, but I want to see the two-way player stuff in play first. Because I think it could really go anyway. It could be something that none of them want to use. or I mean, what if teams, you can use our two-way players, but you owe us money. Like, you have to pay us to play to allow him to play there, and so stuff like that. There could be a lot of shady things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, because like even right now, it seems like with the two-way players, it's primarily that player is always in contenders. I mean, sure, sometimes you might see a promotion. Like Saucy from Atlanta Reign definitely comes to mind in this case, in regards to like recent examples. But for the most part, the affiliate is very like separate from what we're seeing within the Overwatch League. But we've seen so many academy teams dissolve in here, since the start of the season, and I really hope that with how much more encouragement there is to, just have more two-way players, that there's going to be more reasons for these teams to actually go out and pick up like the secondary roster to compete in contenders, regardless of, what region they're going to be competing in this case.
I mean, you would hope so. But I'm not gonna, keep my fingers crossed. In theory, I don't have faith in teams at this point to do the right thing, because a lot of them just haven't done the right thing lately.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see what they do. To me, like, people are like, oh, they gave us a lot of information. To me, this was a lot of fluff.
Right.
Like, it was a lot of, all right, does this affect anyone besides the actual players? No, it doesn't. So it's one of those things I'm just like, whatever.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because this next thing we're going to talk about is kind of in the gray area, if in regards to these new construction rules. So Washington today announced that they have signed Decay, and this move is currently pending league approval. So just as a background, this is someone who parted ways with Dallas Fuel back on August 3rd after he had requested his release. You go over like the rumors of Decay betching himself to play Valorant that started to become widespread. And then, following his release, you had Hastro basically throwing him under the bus, saying, Decay, was just refusing to work with the staff. They were just moving their own way, yada, yada, yada. But, you look at the Justice, and this is a team who have definitely been a punching bag this season. They're 4-16. They got a -30 map differential. And there's so many things that I find weird about this. For starters, you have Decay, who literally, Ed, could approach any team that he wanted and land it anywhere. But he decides, of all places, that he's going to go to a bottom-feeding team in the Washington Justice after playing for one of the more overhyped teams, who are also not necessarily the best in the Dallas field. But the timing of this just seems so off to me, because you figure you have Washington, who have had Lulsish on their roster, who has not been able to travel for over a year now. And, you look at the construction stuff, and, it says, like, hey, you can sign a free agent if one of your players elects to, like, not be able to travel, whether it's due to COVID or they just can't travel outright. But you're in a situation here where the Justice, like, they've had a player who would have met that criteria for, like, the entirety of the season, and it just seems like they're using that ruling as a loophole to go out of their way to sign Decay in order to somewhat try to salvage a season. And, like, it boggles my mind, because, we for sure thought, hey, Decay's gonna be out for the rest of the season. He's basically he'd be the one to, like, make the call to any team, and he'd get in just like that. And now all of a sudden, Decay's back on Washington, and my mind is blown right now. Like, I can't help but feel like there's a little bit of collusion happening.
To some degree, I think that Decay probably talked to somebody at, at the Justice, and they flat out said, listen, you know, I think, this is our plan for the next year. We're just gonna go ahead and we want like you and Janu and Stitch and Tuba to kind of be like our main people going forward. We're gonna replace our support line, get a new support line in, get a new main tank. We just need you to sign now in anticipation of next year. And they probably paid him what he wanted. So I don't know. It's there's some funkiness here, but I don't know. I think we don't know what exactly goes on in the inner workings behind the scenes and stuff like that. But this was a great signing for the Justice. I mean, they got Decay. That's a win in my book.
It's still too little, too late.
It is too little, too late. But at this point, the Justice are playing for season 4, not for this season.
Right.
So, but yeah, no, Decay and Tuba could be a pretty scary DPS lineup.
All I know is when I woke up and I saw this, I felt like I was waking up in an alternate universe. I was like, wait, what? Am I reading this right? Yeah.
Yep, you're reading it right. Brutal.
Well, it's still not gonna have me give them any less flack, given their season happenings so far. But anyways, moving into general Overwatch news. Unfortunately, Overwatch is down yet another lead writer. As they had announced the departure of Alyssa Wan, and this happens only a few months after their prior lead writer Michael Chu had left Blizzard. Now, for a while there, Alyssa had basically been considered to replace Chu as a lead writer for Overwatch. And, her work had included, lore pieces for, Baptiste with the What You Left Behind that released earlier in the year. And she had been with the company for 2 years at this point. But, obviously right now we're still kind of, in that lull period. We keep hearing, oh yeah, we got things in the work. Alyssa seemed pretty excited about that. And I'm sure there's still a couple of things that, Chu and Wan had both worked on that we still haven't quite seen surface as of yet. But when we don't really have a clear direction right now, this isn't necessarily the news that I want to be hearing. I'm not saying it's going to be an immediate reason to panic, but it does make you wonder, okay, when is this lore stuff going to happen? Because if it's not until the Overwatch 2, whether, you want to label it an expansion or a sequel or whatever, that's still a long ways off. And, we haven't really had a clear timetable here when it comes to some of these other, media offerings that we have seen in, months and years past.
When I saw it, Overwatch community concerned as game loses another key writer. Writer for what? We haven't seen anything. What are they writing? You have the book, but that had a legit just straight up author. So I mean, I guess it's one of those things where we could go ahead and be like, well writing less for Overwatch 2, but we don't know if that will even have story. So, and then you start hearing all these reports about how horrible Blizzard pays their employees in the past week and
Mhm.
all that stuff. So this kind of stuff, it's part of the game with Blizzard. Blizzard has always been the starting ground for people,
And
and
not
then they
not the
go off
end
to
game.
other, yeah, unless you get hired back by them to be the end game, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's, you know, it's gonna happen. You saw it all the time in the WoW community. You've seen it all over Hearthstone, Overwatch, Diablo, Heroes of the Storm. You saw it in every game. So this is just kind of the way it goes.
Well, hopefully we'll have some updates here soon. But we did get official confirmation at the recent earnings call by Activision Blizzard from Blizzard President J. Allen Brack, who revealed that BlizzCon will be taking place virtually in early 2021. Now, we kind of heard them having that conversation, but not officially like confirming it, like a month or two ago. So this is like the first time like we actually know like okay, it's like legit happening at this point in time. But this November, first November since like 2012 that we're not gonna have a BlizzCon, obviously due to COVID-19. And
Mm-hmm.
Ed, as we've said, like we're kind of in this period now where the last time we had Overwatch 2 news was BlizzCon of 2019.
Yes.
And now we figure, early 2021, so, January, February, we'll say, we could be looking at a situation where we'd be going 14 months without any sort of news revolving around Overwatch 2 or its development or release or really anything Overwatch 2 related. And I know for me, that's a definite reason to be concerned because that is a very long time, especially like this deep into a game cycle, to not know what's kind of like going on behind the scene. And I'm sure obviously the pandemic plays a role
Yeah.
in more ways than one. But that is a very long period, regardless of any outside interference or anything like that. But, there is another event coming up at the end of the month, which is Gamescom, which is basically the other convention where we would typically be hearing about, announcements from Blizzard and the content that they're working on. And I know in the past it's been more so probably like World of Warcraft based than anything, and obviously Shadowlands is in beta. There's no current like release date for that. But like that would be the other place outside of BlizzCon that we would typically be hearing about stuff that is currently in the works. So that is like the final week of August. I think it's like the 26th or 27th through like the 30th. Are we looking at Gamescom as being necessarily like the panic button? So like let's say we're in a situation where we don't hear anything then, and then we're literally having to wait until January or February. Like, what does that do to your psyche here? Knowing that at that point you'd be waiting well over a year to have like any little snippet of news.
I mean, if we don't get anything at Gamescom, I will be shocked and pissed. Because it's just one of those things where I think it would be a travesty if we didn't get anything. I'm just scared that something like this might actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds weird, but like it's just one of those things where I don't know how I feel about this. I don't think they can wait till who knows when 2021 to have the next Overwatch 2 stuff. I think they would go stir crazy like the fans would, and they'd revolt.
And like,
I mean, you have essentially no new content
Hmm.
for a year of no new content. That's how games die.
Right.
And this would be pretty damn close.
Yeah, and we're definitely in a situation right now where it's kind of a read the room situation, because you look at what's happening within the genre here
Mm-hmm.
here recently. We've seen like new shooters coming out. I mean, most of them have been
BRs.
battle royales. Like we saw Warzone coming out for Call of Duty. You had Valorant coming out, obviously probably being one of the bigger proponents here in this case, just because it is more hands-on first-person shooter, and it's also team based. You also have new BRs like Fall Guys that are like blowing up right now. There's been a lot of content out there right now, and even those games in particular, especially like Valorant, for example, has honestly, like, they've released more content than we've seen from Overwatch here since that initial announcement at BlizzCon of 2019. And at this point in time, we don't know what the release slate is. Like, I know a lot of us were really hoping that Overwatch 2 would be coming out this year. I don't think that's a realistic expectation at this point.
No.
And
Like the only way they can release it this year is if they announce it at Gamescom
right.
in 2.5 weeks. Because it's August 27th to the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2.5 weeks, if they don't announce it, it's not coming out this year.
Absolutely. But, best case scenario, Gamescom would be, we get a new trailer. Maybe we learn about, the initial, like, hero release for the expansion. Or we get a beta announcement. Because, like, right now, I definitely feel like we're getting to that point. Because when you look at the changes that we're seeing within Overwatch, specifically like to the meta. We've already heard like they want to look at particular heroes to rework or retool ahead of Overwatch 2. So like maybe that would be in the pipeline for like a pre-sequel patch or something like down the line. But the timing at this point just feels right that beta should be coming up if they are expecting to release in 2021, especially if they're aiming towards like earlier 2021 to coincide with BlizzCon. So if we don't hear anything at Gamescom, man, I'm gonna be freaking the F out. I don't want to go 14 months with the slow drip that we've gotten. And I know people are like, oh well, we still have the events. It's still not necessarily new content.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still in a situation right now where we still love the game. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But when you look at the things happening outside by other companies and other games within our genre, there's been a lot of stuff for them and not so much stuff for us. So you have to figure you're going to start seeing more turnover when it comes to the player base. And sure, there are things that they can do to like help alleviate that. Like I've already said multiple times, like I really feel like we're at a point in the game's life cycle where Overwatch needs to go free to play. And then sure, like you obviously would sell Overwatch 2 when it does come out, because you just can't go with I can't imagine how much profit they're going to turn if people are only buying cosmetics for Overwatch in its current form. But we need some way to bring new people in, and the best way to do that is to go free to play. Now, whether or not there's that discussion going on right now, I have no idea. But, we've seen games like Rocket League going free to play, and that's another game that's very far along in, their game cycle. But it's just so hard to hold on to, like, that sort of community when here we are 4 years into the game. And we're still looking at a potential, 6 to, honestly, like, 12 months at the most until, like, the next Envision coming out in regards to Overwatch as a game. You're muted.
Sorry. It's one of those things where if they don't release it at Gamescom, I mean, how do they expect people to stay interested in the game?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it's an honest to God question at this point. How do they expect people to stay interested? Because people won't. Especially if it's like 14 months in between shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like they need to announce something. And it doesn't have to be the game's releasing in 2 months. They need to release some form of information. I can't see them not doing it. But it's also Blizzard. And I could see them not saying a word on Overwatch 2 and then just pissing off their fans. Because they've done it in the past with WoW.
They have. I'm hoping we'll get a beta announcement. Anything beyond that would be a bonus. But like my hope is just like beta in October would be best case scenario. But who knows?
That would be a good one. That'd be a good scenario, I think.
And if we do get an announcement at Gamescom, we'll definitely be talking to some friends about that as well.
Exactly. Yeah, we will.
So, if that's not enough incentive for Blizzard, I don't know what is.
Exactly. We'll be talking to people about it. What is going on? We don't talk to people about stuff like this.
Nope, not at all. But anyways, let's talk about stuff that is happening in-game. Like, for reals. And that's the new experimental patch that dropped on August 6th. So this is the one that had been hinted at in regards to the recent developer AMA that they did on the Overwatch Reddit for, hitting 3 million members. Ender Devin Savior, Papa Jeffrey, Cap, praise him. He was the one who, he's like, yeah, our top priority, looking at the current, shield-heavy meta that's going on within the game. Well, guess what? That hero update is here on Experimental, and there's a lot of stuff here, Ed. So, let's just go one by one, and I'll throw it over to you. I want to get your thoughts on the direction of the hero and what you think the outcome of this is going to be for that particular hero, if you feel like it's just to the ground, or if, there's still viability in this case. So for starters, we're looking at Brigitte. Her base health has been lowered from 200 to 150, and they also made 2 changes to Inspire. So her total healing was decreased from 130 to 90, which would put it 21 down to 15 HPS, or heals per second. But to alleviate that, they also got rid of the half reduction on her self-healing, so she's still going to have a little bit more sustainability in regards to herself in this case.
Yeah, this... to the ground? Can I say to the ground on this one? The only reason I think it's to the ground is because, I mean, the healing was cut way down, so she's way less brawly.
Mm-hmm.
And she, and her healing is reduced when she's flailing around. Now, yes, they made up for it with her self-healing is essentially doubled, I guess you could say, but I don't see that being enough. I just don't. So I don't know what they're gonna do. Like, I think this is pretty much when the epitome of into the ground.
Yeah, like for me, I feel like, let's say they didn't lower the health. She'd still be viable in that case, I would think. But it's just the fact that she is that on top of the double dip in regard. Well, technically not a double dip if they buffed something by half.
I mean, she's essentially with shield. She's a 200 HP hero, and that's only with her shield.
Right, which doesn't have that much health to begin with.
Yeah, that is 50 health on it. So, like, if you it's one of those things where think of it this way: without her shield, Baguette is as sturdy as Tracer. Like that's the way you kind of have to think of it.
Without any panic button.
Exactly. So it's like, ooh, this is brutal. But yeah, I want to say this is to the ground.
All right, moving on. Let's talk Orisa, everyone's least favorite tank.
So boring.
I'm not gonna apologize to any Orisa players out there. That's the majority of the hive mind here. But anyways, Orisa base armor has been reduced from 250 to 200, and we have two changes to Halt. They reduce the radius from 7 meters to 4 meters, but then they increase the projectile speed from 20 to 30. Now, Ed, in the past, the pulled port combination with Orisa Roadhog pretty prominent. Maybe on some maps more so than others. But I have to say, like, that hold radius reduction is severely noticeable. And, when you factor in, okay, the projectile speed's going to be quicker, that's definitely going to throw off the time in. But then you're also throwing off just the amount of room that you have to work with in order to suck people up, in order to, like, pick them off either with, like, a Widow headshot or, whatever. So it's two complete changes on how that operates, which messes with time-ins on just not Orisa, but also her teammates. And then you also have the base armor reduction. So really, across the board, these are some pretty hefty changes as well. You're muted.
Do that all the time. I'm gonna go with this one as well as with In the Ground. That's what I'm gonna go with on this one, because it's nerfed into the ground. That's just the way it is, and I don't think there's anything anybody can say to convince me that it's not, because that base armor, the Hults just completely screwing people over, is just it's out of this world. Which is fine. I'm totally fine with this. They need to change around heroes from time to time. So I like this change. Orisa was getting too good. So good for them for changing this up.
And I do want to mention, too, like, when you talk with the community in regards to, like, individual abilities within the game that they really wanted changed, Orisa's Halt was near the top of that list. And I know, like, in the past they had one particular patch cycle that really kind of hit, like, on a lot of the notes from the community, but Halt was, like, never on that list, so it's good to see them kind of circling back at that point. So at this point, guys, that basically, looking back at the checklist, just leaves the main multi-freeze. So, fingers crossed.
And May is not as prevalent anymore.
Correct.
Which also is a good thing.
All right, so moving on to Pharah. And Ed, I got thoughts on this one.
Okay, I have not played New Pharah, so
okay.
This one's all on you, bud.
All right, so hover jets saw two changes here. The movement speed has been increased by 20%, and then you also reduce the regeneration rate from 50 down to 35 per second. Now, another Pharah bit, we have the barrage duration being reduced from 3 to 2.5 seconds. Now, for one, like, the barrage change, like, whatever. Like, barrage is basically the ultimate that you hit, not to get kills, but to kill yourself. I mean, really, that's what happens. Especially if you talk to, like, Melarina, she's just hitting the signs anyways, and, the splash damage is there. She ends up dying in that situation.
Well, she's a Mercy main.
It's understandable. She only knows one side of it, so, like...
She's like, you actually have to fire? Like, I'm used to just holding left click and it automatically attaching to people.
Right. Now, these changes to me are kind of odd. For Pharah's, obviously the big thing is in the past you could basically fly indefinitely. If you time things right, if you use good use and of your like jet fuel, if you know how to like hover and whatnot, with the stutter fly. So you're still able to do that for a while. But the problem is when you're looking to boost again, your cooldown is typically around 2 seconds from being up, and you're not really able to do that as effectively. So if we're talking in a short fight situation here, I don't feel like you really notice the changes all that much. But when you start to get into those extended fights, fights that aren't just like, oh, we got an early pick and then you back out, that's really when you start to notice the changes here. So I feel like at the baseline for Pharah now, it really raises the skill floor of this particular hero. But I feel like at like the lower level, those players probably aren't going to see too much of a difference for her.
Mm-mm.
But at the higher level, it's going to be more noticeable just because they're used to being in the air and having higher uptime in the first place. And I can't say like having the extra speed has been like, oh, I can just do whatever the heck I want at this point without having to worry about dealing with, enemy hit scan. That's still going to be the case. It's not like the Moth Mercy flying around where you just can't hit the damn hitbox. So that's still going to be prominent there, but any sort of extended fights, it's going to be super noticeable. But in a normal situation, it's not too much of an adjustment. So I feel like I need to test this one out a little bit more, but not being able to have as much uptime in the air is definitely going to shy people away from Pharah at this point.
Yeah, it could. I think this is definitely a change meant for the lower levels and not the higher levels, which I'm fine with. Like the movement speed is definitely something that could wreak havoc on the lower levels,
Mhm.
because lower levels they already have a massive problem like the hit scans countering it. They already have a problem hitting Pharah, so this is just going to make it worse. The regen rate at lower levels, I don't think it's going to be an issue because most of the people at the lower levels don't know how to properly use the hover jets to always stay in the air.
Right.
It's so I don't think that is going to be a factor. Where it's going to hurt people is at the higher levels. So it's like a buff and a nerf to Pharah at the exact same time.
Yeah, I feel like, though, at the end of the day, the key thing to look at here is still Pharah's in this weird position where she's really the only hero within the game that has to have another hero in play. And I don't know if that is ever going to change, but it always kind of puts her in this really weird spot compared to like the rest of the hero roster.
Yeah. I mean, I get that, but again, at lower levels, you don't need that person. Because the majority of the time you don't have that person. So
I feel like when I do my DPS placements, I'm going to put that to the test and only run Pharah. And you'll see how many times I still get hit, even at gold.
makes sense.
Just so
I mean,
I'll wait until this stuff gets patched through, though.
okay. I still need to do placements, so I will go with you. I will not heal, though. I will tank for you.
And I
not
can't.
main-
My favorite thing will be how many times I lock in Pharah and then no one goes Mercy. And then people are like, well, don't expect any heals.
Like, please, Lord, give us an Anna, at least.
No, it'll be like Moira Lucio. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
thanks. But anyways, let's talk about, honestly, like, to me, this is probably the bigger change out of the lot just because I've already been seeing a ton of this character anyway. But, like, if we're talking, Ed, about solo queue here and pick potential, This one is pretty sizable. We're talking
Yes.
Roadhog. So, looking at the scrap gun, ammo reduced from 6 to 5, and then the damage per projectile was increased from 6 to 7. Then he also made a tweak to the recovery, increasing it from 0.7 to 0.85 seconds. Now, okay, this is kind of a middle ground here. This is not quite a full revert back to old Roadhog with his damage. It's a halfway point. Because I know in the past, Roadhog used to have 9 damage per pellet. So it's not quite the old numbers, but it does put Roadhog in a situation where he's going to be able to manage to do better against heroes like Ana and Reaper. And, you know, like, it even puts, like, Doomfist and Mei within range now as well. So you're going to have more heroes within the game that you are going to be able to hit your hook combos against. So, so that pick value, if you can land those hooks, is actually pretty damn good. Plus, you know, like, if you factor in, well, there's going to be a little bit less shields in the game overall. And even if there are shields, probably going to be broken fairly soon, like, unless it's Reinhardt, I guess, in this case. But, you know, the Flame Cog has always been a thing. And now it's going to be even more pronounced than what it was in the past.
And I couldn't be more excited. I love playing Roadhog. Roadhog is probably my favorite character to play in the whole game. So the fact that we're seeing Roadhog actually getting some lovin', oh, it's awesome. So I love it. I love it. You can easily one shot a lot more people now. I think anyone 200 health or lower now, you can one shot or do the hook, shoot in the face, and it kills them. If the math I've heard is correct. So it's definitely worthwhile. I love this. He's a good off tank, but the lack of mobility and the lack of protection for his teammates will prevent him from getting played at the higher levels.
Yeah, he's still an old battery. But that's not to say that you still can't find plenty of value if you are landing those combinations. So it's a trade-off, essentially.
Yeah, I do think they should reduce the amount of ult charge gained against Roadhog.
Okay.
Just because I think that would truly help out him a lot. Like, a lot. So, I don't know. We'll see, though.
Yeah. I'm excited to... I haven't played Roadhog yet on Experimental, but that's definitely the one out of all of these that piques my interest.
Yeah. Roadhog, and, like... So, if I was to clarify myself as one type of player, and I don't play it as much because most of the time I get sucked into being the main tank, off tank is my favorite thing to play in the game. More than DPS, more than support. I love playing Roadhog, Sigma, D.Va. I'm trash at Zarya, but Roadhog, Sigma, D.Va are my 3 of my favorite heroes to play. So, like, the fact that they changed Roadhog for the better, Sigma, you know, we'll go over his changes next. But yeah, I'm excited to see some off tank loving.
Well, you know, they had to buff one of your characters, so they're like, okay, we giveth, and then we also taketh away, because Sigma got hit pretty hard. So the experimental barrier had its health reduced from 900 to 700, and they also reduced the regeneration rate of experimental barrier from 120 to 80 per second. Now, outside of that, they also increased the kinetic grasp cooldown from 10 to 12 seconds. And that's pretty brutal. Oh man, like double dipping on barrier. I'm not too surprised on that front, but it's always more pronounced when we see tweaks to like more than one ability in a toolkit here. You muted it.
It's one of those things where these changes seem drastic, but I don't think they are. And the reason I say that is I just don't believe that, like, his barrier, the way you see it worked is it's more of a situational barrier
Mhm.
and less of a let's put this barrier up to prevent all damage.
Right.
So like reducing its health, yeah, it still serves its purpose. It's a situational barrier that will block damage. The kinetic grasp is probably the um bigger nerf, but I don't think this puts Sigma out of viability. But I think it just makes him less of an auto pick.
Hmm.
And I think that's great. Like Sigma, when Sigma first came out, he was the most easily, more than Baguette, the most overpowered hero to ever be released into this game.
Yeah, it was oppressive.
Yeah, and they've done nothing but nerf him. And you know what? He's still always been viable, and I think this will still make him viable, just not an auto select at this point. He's still an off tank. He will never be a main tank with this kit,
Despite what people in gold
despite
want to
what
think.
people do. But yeah, he's definitely super worth it. Still.
All right, so we got two more heroes to talk about with balance changes. So we got Symmetra. The photon projector delay before losing charge was increased from 2 to 4 seconds. Then he also reduced the cooldown of teleporter from 12 to 10 seconds. Now, this one's kind of weird. Like, part of me is just like, well, if they're expecting less barriers within the game, you're gonna have less to kind of like build off of with your primary weapon with Symmetra. So like adjusting the delay before you lose your charge makes a ton of sense.
Mhm.
But if you are in a situation where they are running double barrier, your ass is getting microwaved. That's just all there is to it at that point. But I don't think we're in a situation where even changing the cooldown for teleporter is gonna be making for like more teleport attacks or anything, because the cooldown isn't really an issue on that front. So that one's just kind of like weird in this case.
Yes.
So I don't know if this is necessarily like a buff per se, because you have something that might not be coming into the play at all versus something that might only be coming into play in certain situations.
This almost seems like if these changes don't come into play, Symmetra becomes super viable.
Right.
Like if our nerfs to shields don't stick, Symmetra becomes better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what these changes are. You buff her damage, especially against shields and stuff like that, with these changes. That they're like, all right, it's a buff. It is a clear buff, but it's only viable if shields stay being a thing. So it's like we built in a little bit of a buffer
Mm-hmm.
against anti-shield. So you know what? I'm fine with that.
It's a safety netting.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so last but not least, we have Zenyatta. With the secondary fire, seeing a couple of changes here. So the charge rate increased by 15%. So that is down to 0.52 seconds per orb. And then the rate of fire increased from 8.5 to 9 shots per second. All right. Right-click Zenyatta is back? Question mark?
I mean, that charge rate increase is pretty nasty. Like, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, real nasty. So, it's hard to be like, oh yeah, no, this really isn't a thing. But yeah, it's, whew, it's definitely gonna be a thing. Like, she was already super deadly. He, she, it. uh, was already super deadly, and the secondary fire is what normally gets you. So I think this is a good buff to Zenyatta. The only thing is I'm worried this is going to be too overpowered because the reason Zenyatta fell out of the meta was really because of the double shields, and you couldn't fire through shields, so a lot of your damage just wasn't getting done. But now that they nerfed the shields, they buffed they buffed Zenyatta by just getting rid of the shields. But then they double buffed Zenyatta because it got rid of the shields and buffed Zenyatta's abilities. So I feel Zenyatta might be a tad overpowered because of it.
I don't know. I feel like you're still gonna have like a little bit more pick potential.
Yeah.
I don't know how the damage is going to work out in the long run, though, to see like how much of a buff this actually will be, because you're still going to be looking to apply pressure primarily with your main fire, as opposed to the alternate in this case.
But with a 15% increased charge rate, that's pretty massive.
Mm-hmm. So interesting stuff on there, guys. Like, if you haven't played Experimental, this is definitely the one to check out. And, you know, with that, too, like, we have to keep an eye on when this stuff is getting patched through. Because chances, like, out of all the Experimental patches that we have seen, this one definitely feels like it is a definite, this stuff is going through. So they can shift the meta.
I 100% agree with you on that.
Because, like, you know, they've already talked about, like, hey, like, for the Overwatch League playoffs, we want to not be playing in double shield.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So I think this is all going to go through. And I'm totally fine with that. Anytime I can see more Roadhog, possibly more Roadhog, the better.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see, like, what sort of compositions we're going to see. Like, Rein Zarya is still going to be a thing. I'm primarily more intrigued to see what players are going to be using Roadhog with. Like, what's going to be the primary main tank in that situation? Are they still going to go with Orisa? Are they just going to default to Reinhardt? Who knows? Yeah. But we'll find out soon enough. But like that's basically all the stuff on the Experimental card. A lot of good stuff there. A lot of interesting changes. Some of which, you know, might impact lower ranks or higher ranks more than others. But I'm definitely looking forward to checking out whatever's going to be happening with meta shifts, both at, you know, higher ranked games. It's not really not going to change too much in our games, just because like we're already seeing a ton of Roadhog in gold anyways, so I'm kind of used to him already being there. And you know, if they're buffing Zenyatta, I'm just gonna end up right clicking him even more, so he can just feed me more transcendences. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and we'll have to see if this is indeed the death of Double Barrier. And if that's the case, like, are we going to be in a situation where they start toning down hit scan DPS? Because that would be the other downside, or that would be the downside for all these barrier nerfs, where all of a sudden, like, all these hit scan players are going to be popping the F off because there's nothing in their way to really stop them.
The world may never know.
We'll just have to wait and see, or do changes just not matter and people will still default to double barrier anyways? Because in some weird ways, nerfing something that just makes people want to still play it.
That is also very true.
Because, you know, some barriers, Ed, are still better than just no barriers.
Exactly.
Like, and that's the tricky thing with balancing. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks ahead. But for now, I think it's time that we close out the shop for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, please do us a favor and head on over to iTunes, write and leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. We're always looking for more ways to improve the show. If you would like to support our podcast, as well as the other podcasts on our network, you can consider checking out our Patreon page at patreon.com/OWL Network. We have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So you too can join the likes of our master and above patrons in Daniel, Owl, Kesha, and 044 and helping our network grow. And if you guys haven't yet, it is worth mentioning Overwatch Recall is back. Hoping to get some creator interviews done here fairly shortly, but those will be releasing basically every Wednesday in your podcast feeds with the weekly recall, which is a listen of all the prior week's episodes every Monday on our new website, which I know you're going to plug here in a minute anyways. So with that being said, Ed, please let our listeners know how they can contact our show.
All right, so you can reach us through email at hndoverwatch@gmail.com. We are on Twitter, and that's at hndoverwatch. We do have a website, and that's owlnshow.com. Or did you change the domain name on me?
It's owrecall.com.
It is owrecall.com. You changed it on me. I see how it is here. Our website is owrecall.com. We do have a YouTube at youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. We have a Discord at discord.me/OWLN Show. We are streaming presently live on Twitch at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so help support the show by subscribing to our channel and earn our network emoticon. Our podcast network does stream pretty regularly. On Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific, we have the Overwatch League Network. On Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, we have OWL by the Numbers. On Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, we have this show, Heroes Never Die. And then normally on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, we have our Hearthstone Battlegrounds podcast, Tavern Tales, over on twitch.tv/Tavern Tales HS. But this week we're recording it right after this because, well, I'm busy. And you can reach me personally on Twitter, and that's at Edinar83, or on Twitch at twitch.tv/Edinar. Totem, where can they find you at?
All right, well, you can find me over on Twitter at TumblrDrunk, as well as Twitch. Pretty much streaming Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays during the evening at twitch.tv/TumblrDrunk, where you can find me playing either Overwatch or Hearthstone Battlegrounds. And that will probably be the only two things that I will ever play on stream, but, you never know.
I'm streaming Titanfall 2 tomorrow night, Friday night. My Apex community is demanding it. They're like, how can you do a show about Apex and never have played Titanfall 2 before?
Well, that didn't stop you in all the other episodes.
Right? So I told them I'd stream it this Friday.
Well, there you go. A little bit of fan service in that regard. But that will do it for us here tonight on Heroes Never Die. I want to thank you guys again for joining us for another episode, this being episode 219. And we will see you guys back next week. You take care and have a good night.